Hi and welcome everybody to the Uncanny X-Men. My name is Philip Tanser, better known as Logan McCree. A week ago, the BBC released a documentary that we filmed last year. The documentary was about me and my involvement with the men's rights movement, and they followed me on my journey to Chicago to attend the International Conference on Men's Issues. I received a lot of uh, reactions. I received emails. I read most of the comments, and today I want to watch the documentary with you, and I'm gonna give you my views, what I liked about the documentary, what I didn't like about the documentary. A spoiler alert, overall I thought the documentary was very fair, especially in regards to me, uh, a little less fair in regards to the men's rights movement, but overall I think it was not a hit piece. At the end of the video, I will also talk about some of the reactions that I heard, emails that I got, without obviously going into details because they were personal. So let's start the documentary. The original title was I Am a Man's Rights Activist, and they changed the title for YouTube to Ex-Porn Star and Activist Explores Men's Rights Issues, BBC Stories. Yeah, that's not exploitive at all, but I guess the BBC needs clicks as well. And my past as a porn star, even though it has nothing to do with my involvement with the men's rights movement, is, I guess, a good sales pitch. So let's start. And obviously, I'm going to stop the video every time I think I should say something about it. We have to start right away. A lot of people mentioned that the music sounds like from a horror movie or like a thriller, which pitches the idea that the men's rights movement is in some ways nefarious. And I think especially you're gonna see that in a couple of moments because they cut to certain scenes from the documentary, and it does give the feeling of threat or that there is something creepy or shocking going on. It was I had a similar feeling when the BBC did a documentary on incels. Uh, they put a lot of negative stuff in the beginning, or they started with a negative spin, but I get it. I do not hold it against them because you want to pull people into a topic, and the from the BBC's point of view, the men's rights movement is something nefarious or dark, or at least there are parts of the movement that are nefarious and dark. That's why they're interested. So they would start with, "Ooh, who are these people? Is there something dark going on?" I think that's just a technique to actually to make people interested, just like the title of the documentary. So I don't have a problem with the music, especially because over the course of the documentary, I would say the tone doesn't stay consistently against the men's rights movement, and goes in and out. But we'll get to that. I think as a men's rights activist, you are constantly being silenced.
Our boys are flaming out
Feminist
academically,
principles
toxic
and
masculinity.
Society as a whole has an issue listening to men's issues because it makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't really like to hear about men being vulnerable.
There's always a chance for an echo chamber.
You may not be ones under attack. Free to do that.
So, the title "I Am a Man's Rights Activist," I think that it's an okay title, definitely better than Ex-Porn Star and Activist Explores Men's Rights Issues. And I really do like the fact that they highlight the word "man" in red, and they actually keep it a bit longer. I thought it was a nice introduction to the topic. The scenes that you just saw, they are actually where I live in the north of Scotland. That is just 5 minutes away from where I live.
My name is Alvaro Alvarez. I'm in Scotland. I'm on my way to meet Philip. Philip lives in the very northernmost top of Scotland. I will follow Philip all the way to Chicago, where he's attending the International Conference on Men's Issues, a summit of men and women, actually, who think that men are the ones disadvantaged in modern society.
Two things. First, a little introduction to Alvaro Alvarez. He contacted me. I think he was the one who had the idea for the documentary, and he was initially looking for somebody younger because this BBC series is more for younger people. And they were reaching out to the organizers of the International Conference for Men's Issues in Chicago. They were reaching out to the Honey Badgers, and they were asking them if they knew of somebody like a young British guy who was going to Chicago. And the only person that Alvaro could find was me. Going to Chicago from the UK and attending the conference is relatively expensive because you have to get a hotel room and all of that. So most young people can't afford that. The fact that I'm, first of all, not British and I'm German originally, and the fact that I'm not that young wasn't ideal. But in the end, they decided to follow me and go with me. I'm sure in parts also because of my interesting backstory and the fact that I've got tattoos. So there is something exploitable or something that is easy to market. Just now, they said that it's a conference attended by men and women, and he highlighted that women are there as well. And I heard some MRAs complaining, why should that be said in such a surprised way? But I think the fact that he points it out and that he does point it out in a slightly surprised way, I think that is very positive because he doesn't want to portray it in a way that it's only man. We know the narrative: angry white man complaining about not being able to get laid. Pretty much, that's the narrative that we usually hear. So every time he highlights that there are women as well, and later on in the video I will highlight something else. I think that's very positive.
They are part of the manosphere, a loosely connected network of different groups, from the men fighting for fathers' rights, to pickup artists, to those who don't want anything to do with women ever again.
That is obviously a little bit tricky, most of all because the manosphere includes so many different areas, and picking out these three is a little bit random. I'm very happy that included fathers' rights because that's obviously a very big one and one that makes people feel quite sympathetic. Pickup artists, it's a dodgy one, I would say, and MGTOW, men going their own way. I would say that the description of men that never want to have to do anything with women ever again, I think that's a little bit strong and it's an oversimplification, and I wish that he would have included a little bit more from the manosphere, or maybe even explain the whole concept. Yeah. That's my house, by
My
the
name
way.
is Philip Tanzer. I'm originally from Germany. I moved to Scotland 7.5 years ago. In a very stormy, cold winter, me and a friend of mine from the military, we came to the Northern Highlands, hitchhiking and wild camping. And I came across Durness, and I was like, that's as far away from civilization as you can get without actually leaving the mainland. And it just felt right to me. I work as a hairdresser, massage therapist. I'm an artist and sell my art. As a man growing up, knowing that I liked men, I constantly had to question my position in life, my masculinity.
I have to stop here. So, first of all, this introduction of me walking on the beach and showing my everyday life, I think, well, it's a normal tool of introducing a person, and unfortunately, I think unfortunately, the documentary focused much more on me personally rather than men's rights. The focus was more one person's journey in the men's rights movement. As I said, I'm not super happy about that because I think men's issues need to be highlighted much more than one men's rights activist. But he tried during the whole video. He tried to portray me as human and as likable as possible, I think. And I'm very happy that Alvaro, who actually I would say Alvaro became a friend while shooting the documentary. He tried to treat me as fairly as possible, um, and he asked me, well, before the documentary came out, he did tell me that he really hoped that I'm okay with the depiction and that I didn't feel like it was too harsh or too biased. And overall, I'm quite happy. The fact that it was mentioned uh, that I'm interested in man, that's correct. I used to identify as gay till I was 32. What was unfortunately left out, but I guess it was left out to not overcomplicate my situation. I started dating women again when I was 32. And since then, I'm much more focused or almost exclusively focused on relationships with women while I'm still attracted to men. It's quite possible that he did leave it out just to not make it more complicated, and there is always the potential to be criticized when you say that you're on this journey. People can say, oh, he is suppressing his homosexuality, or he's becoming more conservative, which is true. um, so I wouldn't say that's a negative thing. It's I feel slightly misrepresented because now a lot of people said, "Oh, he's gay, he's gay, he's gay." I don't identify as gay.
A man, at the moment, I think it feels like whatever we do is not enough or is wrong.
I
It
think
would be
this
good
part
if we
connected with quite a few people. The things that I say about just being a man.
could look at the positive aspects and the negative aspects, both of women and men, in a balanced way.
Obviously, I tried the whole time to be as balanced as possible as well. I always highlighted that we as men's rights activists do not ignore the problems of women. We just focus more on men because women already have a very strong focus and they get a lot of help, which is wonderful. Just we we men need a little bit help as well. So I did try to show him how balanced we are as men's rights movement, and that we are not a mirror image of what we say feminism is like. That's my village where I live.
Well, building a house was always incredibly important for me. In Germany, we have the saying that to be a real man, you have to plant a tree, build a house, and have a child. I grew up in Germany, in the south of Germany, and my father was a dentist. My mom, she ran a company, like an import-export company. And my mom was actually was a little bit afraid that I would grow up to be too normal. So she bought me a heavy metal t-shirt and she gave me one of her like old leather trousers. I was part of the Gothic scene, so
I heard somebody saying that first of all, there is not a lot of mention of my father in the documentary, and there's a good reason for it. My father and I, we were not particularly close, which had to do with the fact that my father got on better and focused more on my brother because my brother was a bit shy and quiet. And when I was born, my father was worried I that my brother wouldn't get as much attention anymore, and that it would traumatize him because he heard a radio program where they were talking about that. So my father decided to focus more on my brother, and everybody else was kind of focusing on me, which created a distance between me and my father. And I never knew why there was this distance. And only 4 years ago, I was in the car with my father driving through Scotland, and he told me the story, and I was like, "Oh my God, that makes all the difference," because it wasn't that my father didn't care about me. It was actually that my father wanted to be fair. I don't think that they found the perfect balance. And since I moved to Scotland and since I built my house, my father and I are actually very close. And he was always a good provider and a good father. I would say he was a good father. He just wasn't the dad that I needed. But now we're getting on really well. Somebody else said in the comments that my mom dressed me up because she bought me a heavy metal t-shirt and gave me a pair of leather trousers. She definitely did not dress me up at all. She said, "Oh, here's something for your birthday," and it was absolutely my choice if I wanted to wear it or not. And I loved my mom a lot, and I thought, oh, I should probably appreciate her gifts. Also, I was a Alice Cooper fan, so I already had some interest in that. Yeah, so don't worry, my mom did not dress me up, and she did not. There was nothing narcissistic or nefarious about both of my parents, I would say.
I was wearing black makeup quite often and feather boas and spiky collars and stuff like that.
That was all my
that
choice.
was me in a beautiful silver glitter dress with a head dress that I made myself as well. I'm pretty sure RuPaul would be very proud of me.
It's quite interesting because, like, back then I was what today would be referred to as non-binary, and I actually have the symbol of Prince tattooed all over my body, which is the combination of the male and female symbol. And it was always incredibly important for me that society and people incorporate the feminine and the masculine within them. So when I listen to some gender study stuff and male feminists, I kind of understand where they're coming from, but it's so it doesn't come from a place of love. It comes from a place of resentment and trying to destroy masculinity, where I think I came from a place of loving both masculinity and femininity and incorporating both parts. And I never questioned my 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 manliness, so to speak. And funny enough, I would say when I dressed as Prince, I felt more manly back then than when I was, for example, dressed in like army clothes and stuff like that. It's difficult to explain why, but let's put it that way. I can completely understand that people go into gender identities and stuff like that. I just think that the way it's being done today, it's a political movement. It's not a personal experience, and this political movement is targeted to destroy gender norms. And I'm I'm absolutely against that. You need gender norms to be actually able to experiment with both of them and be outside of the norms. Sorry for rambling on.
And that was actually my goodbye party from the military. I was in the military for 3 years, and in the military I noticed for the first time real problems in society when it came to men. So almost all my comrades from the military that I was close to,
That's
they lost
actually
their
not
children
me.
in
They
custody
blurred out the wrong
battles,
person.
and it really destroyed them, some of them emotionally.
Yeah, so when I was in the military, I had my first real experience with gender inequality. I mean, I saw it before, but that was drastic because a lot of my friends from the military lost their children in custody battles, and they were alienated, and it really frightened me. And later on, when I started dating women again, I immediately knew that I wanted a family, and my second thought was, and unfortunately that wasn't featured in the documentary because I actually said that. My second thought when I started dating women again was, oh no, I don't want to lose my children if I have children at one point.
So this is my little art gallery slash hairdressing studio slash massage therapy slash political debate podium. I think girls get a lot of support in society right now, like girl power and you can do it and all that, and I think that's great. But because I see that I think boys don't get the same attention as girls at the moment, I really like to show them what they can do, that they could become an artist. Yeah, just inspire them.
There's a narrative.
I really like that he included that into the documentary, especially me talking to the children and showing them the art. I do that a lot, and if you would ask me what's my favorite part of my job and being an artist, it's really talking to children and inspiring them. And quite often, but obviously not exclusively, quite often it's boys. And for me, there's nothing more beautiful than seeing young families coming into my shop. It's quite a touristy area up here, so they don't come in be- just because it's an art gallery. They come here because there are a lot of shops here, and they just go from shop to shop. And it's beautiful to see young families and loving parents interacting with their children. I think because of where I live, because it's so remote, it attracts a certain kind of families that are actually quite stable and interested in nature and stuff like that. So we barely see any negative examples of families. Yeah, my ex girlfriend, she worked in a cafe around the corner, and at the end of the day, we would usually talk about the families that were walking around in the area, and we would say, "Oh, did you see that family with these two kids? Weren't they lovely?" And how they interacted with their kids.
Like women being oppressed in general in history. Do you agree with that narrative or do you disagree with that?
I think that women were oppressed in situations, and I think that men were oppressed in situations. Hi there. No.
Somebody was criticizing or saying that maybe I shouldn't have repeated or used the word oppressed, but since he used the word oppressed, I thought I'm gonna continue because otherwise if if you reject the word, it's very difficult to reach people that use a certain language and use certain words. Sometimes you have to use their words to show them that you're on the same page. I learned that in the military. It was the first time that I interacted with people from completely different walks of lives, much more working class, and I started to use their language when I was talking with them. And so I think if I was talking to a feminist, I would try to use her language just to show that, just to share common ground. But at one point, obviously, you have to clarify how you use the words. I still think that my reaction was okay. Again, I tried to show them that I appreciate the fact that, or I acknowledge the fact that women were struggling, but men were struggling as well.
Come in, have a look around. Just ignore the fact that we are having an interview here.
But what about in terms of, for example, rights to vote, rights to own property, rights to choose their profession?
So the right to vote came, that I think is in America, with the duty to serve the country. So going to the military, and you could question, should everybody then have the same responsibilities and give the just a second.
So, what happened there? And I'm so happy that it was included in the documentary. Obviously, that was it was amazing that this happened. It was such a coincidence. Well, first of all, when he was asking me the question about property and the draft and voting, yeah, the rights to vote, I can still remember I was just thinking, Karen Strawn, where are you when I need you? I'm just not very good with facts and details. I just can't remember dates. I can't remember exact numbers, and there are so many MRAs out there that are just brilliant remembering all these things, and it's just not my strongest suit. I do apologize to all MRAs out there that I didn't do you guys that I didn't do the movement justice. I tried to save the situation as well as I could. And what happened here was there was a couple in there, a woman with with a Karen haircut, and her boyfriend, husband, whatever, and they were listening. And then she got really upset, apparently, and she vocalized it by saying "ugh" when I said that maybe rights should come with responsibilities, and uh, many mentioned that, and I do think that the fact that Alvaro put that into the documentary, a scene that definitely portrays our side as open to debate and sympathetic, and the other side as quite closed-minded and not open to debate. I think it we need to give Alvaro or the BBC credit that they included things like that, because I do not think that the documentary portrayed me in a negative light. I think it did try to portray me in a positive or at least neutral light. I think I was portrayed positively. The men's rights movement, not neutral, a little bit negative. They did try to highlight negative aspects, but I think it wasn't a hit piece, as I said.
Excuse me, just a second, just a second. Excuse me. Uh, just challenge me for a second.
No, I'm really not interested.
But you clearly had a reaction, so you were interested.
Yeah, but I didn't. I'm actually leaving anyway.
Okay, cheers, bye.
So some people said, "Oh, I should have just let her walk away, and there's no point in talking to these people." Maybe that's true. I would say in many cases that is true, and I have been in a couple of like heated debates in my shop over the years. But it is always important to show that we are the ones willing to have an open conversation. I don't know how many, I guess a lot of you guys know Stephen Crowder and his segment Change My Mind, where he is open to debate. And I think that's always important, and we need to be open, and we should not close the doors. We have to be better than the enemy. That's our argument. We have to say, look, we're here to debate. We have the facts, and if we believe that we are right, we always have to be open to a debate, even if the other side debates unfairly, as they so often do.
Does it happen often to you?
It only happens when I can't interact with the person. So right now, I wasn't talking to her, she was just listening. And when people come into a conversation, stuff like that sometimes happens.
I'm sorry that this video is gonna be incredibly
I could
long.
see where Philip was coming from, but I had also heard about misogyny and sexism inside the manosphere.
The nice thing, obviously, is that he didn't say the men's rights movement. And again, we really have to credit him there that he didn't say the men's rights movement. He did say the manosphere. But I'm well aware that people will not understand the difference. So while I think it is fair to say he did not conflate the men's rights movement with the manosphere, which is great, it's they still try to spin the narrative, oh, there is hate in the manosphere, and because people don't really know the difference, they will just associate it with the men's rights movement. But I would say many people criticize men's rights activists like Paul Elam for using very strong language, and but when you really read into the articles by Paul Elam, he does use strong language, but he uses his words very, very wisely, and he doesn't generalize women, for example. He will use strong language as a description of specific women that have specific behaviors. And that is being used by the other side, by the media, for example, to demonize us. Now, I think we should not fall into the same trap and demonize the media or demonize everybody for using certain words, as long as they don't completely lie. Spinning a narrative is bad. I don't like that at all. But overtly lying is worse. So let's, yeah. I know a lot of you guys gonna write in the comments. You are too sympathetic with them and you give them too much the benefit of the doubt. And maybe you guys are right. But I had a really bad article written about myself by Vice magazine, and it was absolutely horrendous. And I call out really bad journalism when it happens. But I think compared to the Vice article, this is pure gold.
And how there was a dark side to it all. Philip has regular conversations on Twitter with someone with a different take on men's issues. Graham Golden, a former police officer who now focuses on violence prevention. So I arranged for both to have a Skype chat.
Yeah, Graham Golden and I actually really appreciate Graham Golden. He is a really nice guy, and I think he really tries to do good. And I would assume, based on his experiences as a police officer, he probably has seen too much negative in man, maybe even in his surroundings. I don't know. Unfortunately, he really embraces a feminist narrative of kind of patriarchal power, and that it's the duty of man to change. And I completely agree that men have to change negative behavior, but he never mentions that women have to change negative behavior as well. So he exclusively focuses on the negative aspects of man. Well, he tries to lift up and to increase the positive aspects of man, which is wonderful, and I really support that part of his work. I just wish he could just say, yeah, women do a lot of horrible things as well, and they destroy men's lives just like men destroy women's lives. So I think he's not as balanced as I am. That doesn't mean that all his work is bad.
So I met Graham on Twitter. I saw that he was invested in helping boys and young men. It became quite clear that we had the same interests in helping men, but we have slightly different approaches.
Even though he works with men, Graham is definitely not a men's rights activist.
Oh,
Hi, Graham.
hi.
Good to see you.
Phil, am I calling you Phil?
You call me Phil, yeah. Logan is my porn name.
Oh, there you go.
I'm gonna keep my clothes on, I promise.
Oh, I forgot to mention, Philip was an award-winning gay porn actor who went by the name of Logan McCree.
After this video, I did receive quite a lot of mails and a lot of contact from gay and bisexual men that that were interested in men's rights as well. So that is great. I still don't fully understand why it's such a big issue otherwise. But on the other hand, if they hadn't mentioned that I am a gay porn actor, people would have brought it up afterwards. And after the documentary came out in three gay magazines. There were articles about me. One of them was completely fine. Two other ones were a little bit hit hit piece style, but one of them was fine.
But more on that later.
Very, very good. Quite excited about going to Chicago. I can't believe we're going to Chicago.
You excited?
I'm very, very excited. I'm excited about the conference, but I'm also excited about going to Chicago, and I'm excited about being on the plane. I love traveling, so.
I know they needed these bits to connect the story and to make it feel more like a real film, like a real story. But I really wish they would have spent a little bit more time on the conference in Chicago and especially focusing on some man's issues.
What's your purpose of going to Chicago? What are you thinking?
I joined the men's rights movement about, I would say, like 1.5 years ago. I came across a video by Girl Writes What. Her name is Karen Strawn, one of the most famous men's rights activists. And I'm like, oh my God, that's spot on. And from there, you start going down the rabbit hole. And then
By the way, dear Karen, if you ever watch this video, thank you so much for saying all these really, really nice things about me on Honey Badger Radio. I think you compared me to an excitable, friendly puppy because of my positive energy. I take that as a compliment.
then all of a sudden, you become a men's rights activist.
This is Philip's second time going to the conference. He was in the one celebrated in London in 2018.
Am I a men's rights activist? Yeah, damn right, I suppose I am. I'm looking for better outcomes for boys. But there's a perception, and it's a perception that I've probably had in the past about, I don't speak to men's rights activists because, they're sinister, they're anti-women, they're anti-feminist, and some people say that they're doing nothing for men, and that's the perception.
Well, I think it's okay that they included it, and obviously that is a bit of a problem because why Graham and I don't really agree on a lot of things. He does have quite a feminist leaning. I have a men's rights activist perspective. I do agree that there are some. I would say some grumpy voices in the men's rights movement. I really don't see any misogyny really in the men's rights movement. I see some people that are a little bit bitter, but predominantly bitter towards the government, bitter towards the laws and the media. But that's not misogyny. Graham is actually a member of the organization Coalition for Men and Boys in the UK. I don't know how involved he is with them, but it is a pro-male organization. So he's not an enemy, but there are clear differences in how we address certain issues, definitely between him and me.
People take the struggles of women very seriously, and that is wonderful, and that is great, and they should. But it's easy for other people to be forgotten.
Again, trying to highlight that we care about both sides and that we do not ignore the struggles of women. And I'm very happy that Alvaro included all of that in the documentary because it does portray us as quite balanced.
I don't see a hatred towards men. I see a frustration and a dislike of the abusing men.
I think if you don't see hate towards men in our society, you are wearing blindfolds. I think the hate towards man is so obvious. Here in Scotland, they are about to introduce like a government task force working on a bill that will make misogyny a criminal offense. but they intentionally excluded hate towards man. I think it is such a blatant bias, and that itself is hate towards man because it ignores the suffering and the pain that men go through.
It's a frustration that all these decades of work and we're still facing these issues. And I think I'd like to see that coming out from the main trades.
To be honest, I have no idea what he's talking about because uh, we have made a lot of progress in regards to women's rights. Are there still problems with domestic violence? Absolutely, but I think in big parts that's because domestic violence is not being addressed the way it should be addressed as a multi-layered issue, with alcoholism, with aggression from both sides. In most cases of domestic violence, it's two partners that engage in violence, not violence from one side towards the other, and definitely not just gendered violence based on patriarchy. That's absolute nonsense. Also, things that need to be addressed are mental health, undiagnosed mental health issues, both by women and by men. And I think that that is being overlooked due to focusing on gender violence, like gendered violence, and the patriarchal oppression and the Duluth model.
Listen, have a great time.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure you'll hear about it.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I wonder if people like Graham, for example, if they would attend a men's rights conference, if they would change their opinion. But I'm almost 100% certain that they wouldn't, because they will. And it's the same with Alvaro, the producer of the documentary. They will focus on the small things that they might disagree with, and all the things that they agree with will be almost forgotten. You just focus on the things that stick out to you and the things that you don't agree with. I love Chicago. If you've never been to Chicago, I urge you to go to Chicago. It's
So
one
I
of the
used
most
to be
beautiful
German
cities
Mr.
in the
Leather.
world.
I was the official representative of the German leather and fetish community. All the winners of all the competitions all over the world, they had a big competition in Chicago. I have to say that I'm not a huge fan of porn because of the way that sexuality is portrayed. But I thought that if I was working in porn, maybe I could bring something into that business that it's lacking, some emotion, something personal. These.
On the one hand, I'm not a huge fan that they included all of that. Also, me being German Mr. Leather, yeah, it's interesting, but it has very little to do with the men's rights movement. My criticism of the porn industry, on the other hand, is I appreciate the fact that he took this in, because I'm actually starting to really advocate against pornography. I myself have suffered under erectile dysfunction based on, I wouldn't say porn addiction, but I watched too much porn, and I got too fixated on it. And so I support groups that help men to reduce that addiction, or to fully get rid of it. I'm a free speech advocate, so I'm not in favor of banning pornography, but I think that men, especially young men nowadays, really suffer under it.
Careers are very short, so I was only in the porn for 3 years. My plan of bringing something positive to the porn industry, I would say overall failed, because it's a big industry and you can only do so much. This time it's a very different kind of men's convention. So I think at this men's convention, people are gonna wear more clothes, and there's gonna be more talking, less action.
Fun fact, just for the guys that are interested, guys and girls that are interested. So the competition International Mr. Leather usually happens in a big hotel in Chicago, and the whole hotel is booked. The first year I went there was in the Hyatt in Chicago, and it was really bizarre because we arrived on the Thursday evening, and at that point there were still normal guests in there and families, and then all the weird fetish people started to book in. So people wearing dog masks and stuff like that started to come in, and from a conservative point of view, I would say I'm not a huge fan of showing your sexuality so openly and kind of forcing it on other people. Uh, but it was incredibly funny seeing that these two groups of people kind of like met, and then the one group uh, left more and more, and at one point the next day it was just weird people in the hotel, and it was I would lie if I would say that it wasn't a crazy and interesting weekend.
So we just did the check-in, and yeah, the conference gonna start in I think 20 minutes. Very excited.
Men's rights.
The fact that they took a gay or bisexual or whatever men's rights activists to represent the well, I don't think I represented the men's rights movement, but I was there way into the movement. Obviously, is a little bit unfortunate because most MRAs are not gay, but I would say that there are quite a few bisexual and gay MRAs in the movement, so it's not unheard of. Mm, and the nice thing is that my homosexuality kind of protects me and protects us from being seen as these yeah, straight angry white man. Well, I'm white, but actually in the next couple of scenes there's a lot of footage of multicultural and multiracial people attending the conference, and I don't know if Alvaro chose these scenes intentionally, but he obviously didn't intentionally exclude people of color in the footage. And I would go as far as assuming that he intentionally tried to show that there are a lot of different people at the conference. As many MRAs know, we are sometimes being depicted by complete idiots like takedown MRAs on Twitter as white supremacists and things like that, which is just absolutely insane, obviously.
Rights activists focus on issues like family law, parenting, or circumcision, and in things like education or health institutions, which they say are biased towards women's needs.
I'm very happy that he at least addressed some big men's rights issues here. I wish they would have done much more of that, but at least some things were mentioned. It's better than nothing.
While some complaints seem legit.
So again, we just saw Tommy Sotomayor, and now you see. I think these two were from Japan, but I do apologize if I'm wrong. So I think it's quite nice that they show that we are quite a diverse group.
Legitimate, they have also been labeled as both misogynistic and hateful by parts of the media and some advocacy groups.
I'll just go back a little bit.
While some complaints seem legitimate, they have also been labeled as both misogynistic and hateful by parts of the media and some advocacy groups.
That was criticized by many that he phrased it like this. I think it was inevitable that he had to mention that, and I think it's okay. To me, it is part of a balanced point of view to address that there are people that disagree with us. Now, the way it was phrased, I think, was absolutely fine, but the way that the brain deals with it, it just connects the word men's rights activists with misogyny and hate group and stuff like that. So, and uh, when it comes to subliminal um, messages, I think I pronounced that wrong. It's yeah, it's not great. On the other hand, I have to say the photos that he showed of the two books. One is called The Feminist Lie, and the other uh, book is called Society Kills Man. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan. Sorry, Mike. I'm not a huge fan of the cover of The Feminist Lie simply because of that ugly face. But when I watched the documentary, I noticed that it actually did something great because it connected the word feminist with this face. And uh, it really worked for me. It worked for me better than when I look at the book usually. And I think I think the intention of the BBC was to show how negative we react to feminism. But to be honest, I think it actually maybe planted a little bit of a seed in the brain that maybe feminism is like that. And a lot of people are nowadays waking up to the fact that feminism is quite a hateful movement. The cover of Society Kills Man, I think, is a beautiful cover, and I think the phrase is really strikes a chord, and so I think it was good that he showed these two covers. Now, this is um, what we're seeing right now is from the organization Hope Not Hate. They are a UK-based organization, extremely left-leaning, associated with Antifa, and they pretty much hate everything to the right of Antifa. And they wrote a lot about British men's rights activists. Funnily enough, what they wrote about us was actually to 90% spot on and really, really well researched and well written. It was just the 10% that were like snuck in, that were exaggerations or lies, um, and depicted us as hateful people, where we just oppose feminism. So they did try to spin it as if we hate women, where we just oppose feminism. Obviously, that's bad enough.
Everything I hear, I always try to say, is that true or is that just a theory?
I was still a bit confused about the whole movement, so I was looking forward to try to understand what was it all about.
Again, when he put in this little clip of me, he shows that I'm not just following an ideology or a doctrine, unlike I would say many feminists do. And again, that was a positive thing, and I appreciate that he put that in.
To get a better perspective, I was also in touch with someone who has a critical approach towards the manosphere as a whole.
So, as you heard, a critical approach towards the manosphere. I have to say that before this documentary came out, there was also a radio version of it, which was quite a bit longer, but I think not as good as this one. And it was not as well connected. And the feminist scholar or the feminist who is criticizing the manosphere, I think in this documentary it made more sense what she said. In the other documentary, it felt very disconnected because she's only referring to parts of the manosphere and she's not referring to the men's rights movement at all. I think it's a little bit better edited and put together here.
My name is Tracy Farrell, and I work with the social data side.
I find it incredibly funny how she walks out of this building holding her scarf, and I know it's it's I don't know why, but it leaves a certain impression of being hypersensitive, and I would say that her facial expression also, she looks like a sensitive and very serious person. I think she actually comes across very, very good. There are very few things that I can completely disagree with that she says, and I would have loved to have a conversation with her during the documentary. Unfortunately, I never met her. It would have been interesting to see what we agree on and what we don't agree on. In the documentary, it's never mentioned if she is a feminist or not, but I double checked, and yes, she is a feminist.
Science research group at the Knowledge Media Institute of the Open University.
Tracy Farrell has studied sexist attitudes online.
And what we did was we tried to see if we could define different types of misogynistic behavior. So we broke it down into some smaller areas like.
So she's researching sexist behavior, but she's only looking at misogynistic behavior, not misandry at all, which is exactly what we experiencing the whole time, that it's so one-sided. Hate towards men is completely ignored, but it is true that, for example, men are being harassed and bullied online way more than women, and a lot of harassment that women experiencing is done by other women. So it's yeah, and yeah, let's continue.
Belittling women. And then we added some categories that we saw more recently emerging down into some smaller areas like belittling women. And then we added some categories that we saw more recently emerging. One of them was this idea of this stoicism. This is just the way that women are. And then
So obviously belittling women, I think it is such a vague concept. When do we start belittling women? And is it about belittling women because they are women? Or is it belittling a woman because she said something stupid? Just like we constantly belittle men when they say something stupid, because people say stupid stuff. I think very, very often it is perceived as if women are criticized for being women, not for their behavior. And I think that is just wrong. Most people are being belittled or criticized or attacked for their behavior, not for their gender. And yeah, I have to go back real quick. So sorry.
that something which we called flipping the narrative, which was presenting. One of them was this idea of this stoicism. This is just the way that women are. And then in addition to that, something which we called flipping the narrative.
Stoicism, that is just the way women are. I think, unfortunately, she misspoke, because I'm very sure that she meant to say stoicism, that's just the way men are. I don't understand how stoicism is seen as a negative, and why that has anything to do with online harassment and sexism. And now she's talking about flipping the narrative as a concept that now it's men that are being oppressed by feminism. And kudos to her, because she doesn't say that men are being oppressed by women. She does say men are being oppressed by feminism. And that's pretty much exactly that what I, as a men's rights activist, would say. We're not oppressed by women, but we are being oppressed by institutional feminism.
Which was presenting the idea that actually women hold most of the political and personal power, and that it is men who are actually subjugated by feminism.
I think that is well put.
One thing that men really crave is respect.
It is unfortunate that almost all the speakers that are featured, even though I really, really liked them, were actually not men's rights activists.
It's not necessarily coming from a place of entitlement or ego. It's coming from a place of need.
I'm a relationship and dating coach, and also the author of Make Love Great Again. Feminist principles and messages kept saying, you know, men, be softer, be less toxic. But women, there's toxic feminism too, and toxic femininity. You know,
I really liked that, first of all, he interviewed a female speaker, and I very, very much appreciate what Deanne said here, and the fact that there is, if there are toxic male behaviors, there are definitely toxic female behaviors. Again, very balanced. At no point do we say there is nothing negative on the male side.
the whole toxic masculinity concept is just a made-up term from feminists to put the scapegoat on men.
For me, it's an unhealthy version of a behavior that can also come in a healthy version.
I think all of us as men need a little extra representation on our side as well. Feminism
Really nice guy, good
comes
friend.
from a woman's need to procure.
I have to point something out. So, and I hope it is okay to actually do point that out. Sorry, I have to find, yeah. In this shot, the first guy that you see, the guy with the base cap, he had a YouTube channel focused on gay men's rights activists. He did a lot of great videos, and unfortunately, he died shortly after the conference. And already during this conference, he was really, really struggling. He had severe. I hope it's okay to say that. I feel it's important to speak about that, and I really hope that it's not disrespectful to his family or anything. But he was suffering from severe pain, chronic pain, and he had medication, and the medication was not well. He didn't react well to the medication, and as far as I know, that led to his death. And I'm very, very sorry that happened. And yeah, you will not be forgotten. I'm very sorry that happened to you.
Comes from a woman's need to procure resources for herself. I think it's always been a rather greedy movement.
Very well put.
By the end of my first day at the conference, even though I heard men talk about the problems they felt they were facing, it seemed that the focus was on finding someone to blame for this apparent crisis of masculinity.
Well, first of all, it's not like the conference was about a crisis in masculinity, and that is probably the first thing where I really want to criticize. Did one or two speakers talk about a crisis in masculinity? Yes, absolutely. But overall, we don't mope around and just complaining that masculinity is suffering. It's men that are suffering. And it doesn't matter how masculine or not masculine they are. It can happen to everybody. Even the manliest men can lose their children, and gay men face disadvantages as well in our society. So I don't like how this was put, because we care about all men, and it doesn't matter how masculine or non-masculine they are.
I asked Philip about it.
I'm hearing a lot of blame into kind of like feminism and the left.
Absolutely, and I would say rightfully so. Some of the problems that we have now is a collision between the traditional roles and the roles that the left wants to see.
To be honest, it almost feels like that wasn't the answer to the question. And I don't know how it was edited, because my opinion came across as incredibly strong and one-sided, like only looking for the blame on one side. And I do think that there is a lot of blame on the left and amongst feminism, absolutely, but not all the issues that men face are to blame on feminism or the left. We are responsible for a lot of our own problems. And if you want to call it patriarchy, well, the structures of society, gynocentrism, and our need to protect women and not to talk about our problem. We men create a lot of our own problems, or at least we don't stand up for ourselves.
So there's already a lot of really great scholarship on the manosphere that demonstrates that there's a lot of different types of groups that tend to be lumped in inside of it. So
I think this is really great that she does point out that the manosphere are a diverse set of groups and that they are lumped together. I do like the fact that she uses the word lumped, as in we don't necessarily identify as being connected. We are just being put together because there needs to be a term for it. I think it's well put.
So I don't think it's a place that's only full of misogynistic people, but I do think it's a place where it might be a little bit easier to have a misogynistic opinion and to vocalize it.
I think that what she says is surprisingly measured for a feminist. I heard some criticism that they picked one of the sanest or a really sane feminist where there are so many crazy ones out there. And does it actually portray feminists potentially in a positive or in a mild light? Yeah. But on the other hand, I'd rather communicate with somebody who has sane views than, or at least communicates her views in a sane way than somebody like the Big Red. Obviously, for us, it's better. The more crazy feminists there are out there, the better, because it shows how that our concerns are true. But for the documentary, I appreciate that she actually made a lot of sense. And she did say that she doesn't think that the manosphere is full of misogynists, but that it creates a space where it's easier. And I think that's very balanced, because there are some misogynists in the manosphere, very few or almost none in the men's rights movement, but there are some misogynists in parts of the manosphere, in the extreme parts. And are there some forums where misogynistic views are being expressed? Yes, and it's easier to express them there than in the mainstream, because our mainstream is incredibly pro-women, which is great. I just wish it was incredibly pro-male as well, but unfortunately it is absolutely fine to bash women in the mainstream.
I also met people who seem to be working on valid issues, like equal custody for men.
Increasingly, fathers are more and more involved with their kids, and increasingly, they are fighting for equal custody. And those stereotypes need to be broken down, because there's no reason why fathers shouldn't have at least a close to fair share.
I think this again was wonderful, because he, first of all, he chose a very good speaker, I think, who expressed himself so eloquently and really, really good. And it's a great point, and a lot of people can identify with the struggles of fathers. So again, I think that he opened a door for people feeling sympathetic to the men's rights movement.
But then I would hear things like this that would go against everything that I knew about the issue.
He said that goes against anything I knew about the issue. I'm glad he didn't say that that wasn't true. He just said he didn't know this side. Unfortunately, he was not open. I would say he was not open to looking into the data and actually, or for example, and that was criticized by people as well. I think he really should have done an interview with Don Dutton about the statistics that he's going to mention in a moment. Instead, he confronted me, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
Social science standards, it's just undeniable that males are more likely the victims of domestic violence. Males are more likely the victims of domestic violence.
I think that is a little bit of a childish or, editing style, the rewinding, as in, did you hear that? That is outrageous. Not super happy about that, and I already said that to Alvaro afterwards in my review of the documentary. And it's a shame that this was really taken out of context. When we look at domestic violence statistics, depending on what statistic you look at, you have very different conclusions. And I think it really depends on how you phrase certain questions in statistics. What is domestic violence? Do we include emotional domestic violence, physical violence, and so on and so forth? There are great videos. My favorite video on the topic is by Stefan Molyneux. I think it's called "The Truth About Domestic Violence."
This was very strange news to me, so I wanted to share with Philip different stats.
Can I read you something different?
Of course.
So I have here figures of the Office for National Statistics. An estimated 7.9% of women and 4.2% of men experienced domestic abuse in the last year. This means almost twice % of women experience domestic abuse.
I find it quite funny because he uses this almost like a, aha, I caught you guys, you're not telling the truth. To me, I'm actually really happy that he does share these statistics, even though the dark numbers tell a different story. It's more 50-50 as far as I know. And again, I think all these statistics, you have to look into them and see how they were conducted, how the questions were asked, and so on. But the fact that 1/3 of victims of domestic violence are men, that is already news to most people, because most people, according to the feminist narrative, most people would think that it's maybe like 5%, maybe 10%. The fact that 1/3 of the official numbers are men is already quite outrageous, and I'm glad he brought that up, because even the BBC has to acknowledge that a huge number of victims of domestic violence are male victims at the hands of women in most of the cases.
Than men. You think these figures are not correct?
I think that similar to the studies that were just presented, you have to look into these studies and how this study was concluded.
But you don't. If you read this, you don't believe this.
Did I say that?
No, I'm asking you. It's a question.
I do not believe this statistic, and I don't believe the statistics that I heard just now.
I'm a little bit sorry that I didn't have a better answer to that. I was put on the spot, and as I said before, many of you guys would have had brilliant answers with lots of statistics and citations and all of that. I'm very sorry that I'm not very good at that. On the other hand, I do think that my answer was as good as I could phrase it, because again, it shows that I question our position as well, and that I look into these issues without just accepting something that I hear from a person.
So now we're gonna listen to Carl Benjamin, one of the speakers that I'm most looking forward to. I had the pleasure in speaking to him in the last couple of days, and really, really nice guy.
So, first of all, Carl, if you happen to watch this video, which I doubt you will, thank you so much for doing a video about the article written about me in Pink News. I really appreciated that. Again, unfortunately, it was constantly said that I'm gay, where I'm actually not gay anymore. But yeah, thanks for the video. And I do apologize that the BBC was treating you so badly. Again, they just can't help themselves, the dirty, dirty smear merchants.
What Philip considers to be a nice guy, for others is someone from the far right and an extremist who has even joked publicly about raping an MP.
We don't owe anyone a particular style or culture. They're doing nothing illegal. They can tell the jokes that they want to tell. They're free to do that. And if the feminist movement doesn't like it, well, the feminist movement can go run and jump off a bridge. I don't care.
Yeah, those were harsh words, I would say. And dear Carl, I think you did not try to come across as more sympathetic, but I completely understand that after all the BS that the BBC was throwing at you. Obviously, Carl is not far right at all, and the BBC. The thing is, just now they said that some people uh, say he's far right and that he joked about raping an MP. It's not some people. It's the BBC. The BBC themselves. They painted him as far right, and they lied about the fact that he joked about raping the MP Jess Phillips. He very very clearly stated that he would not rape her, and that makes all of the difference. Yeah, but and these are the reasons why we just don't trust the media very much. And dear Alvaro, that's probably the big one where I'm a little bit upset with you. But maybe you just have to do certain things according to the BBC. I don't know. I want to share a little story, and I try to keep it short because I know this video is going on forever. Uh, about Carl being a nice guy. It was one evening in the lobby of the hotel, and people were just relaxing and drinking some beer, and there was a group of people standing around close to the bathrooms. And Carl Sargon, he was standing there as well, amongst others, and Mr. Reagan. And we were just listening to each other and we were talking. It was a political debate. And I noticed that outside of this circle of people, there was a young guy standing, a shy, quite a shy guy. And I had seen him several times over the days. A very, very nice guy. Unfortunately, I don't remember your name if you watch this video. And he was not really in the conversation, and I told him to come over and join us. So he walked over, and then we moved the whole conversation to a group of couches, and there were like 4 seats. And some people sat down, and the people that were sitting down were Carl, Sargon of Akkad, Mr. Reagan, the shy guy, and me. And then the other people were standing around these 4 chairs, couches. And we continued the conversation, and again, it was about political stuff and conservatism or whatnot, and there were some funny bits as well. And while Mr. Reagan was talking and we were listening, all of the sudden, Carl interrupted the conversation and looked at the shy man that was sitting opposite of him. And he said, I'm so sorry, what's your name? And the guy said his name, and Carl said, what are you working? What are you doing? And he invited him into the conversation, and he was really interested in this young man. And then this guy told an incredibly funny joke, and we were all laughing. I don't remember the joke anymore. And then the conversation continued as before, and it was such a beautiful interaction of course Carl is just a normal guy, but he is also a famous YouTuber, and he doesn't have to interact with other people. He doesn't have to reach out. Everybody wants to talk to him, and the fact that he opened this conversation and that he invited this shy guy into the conversation, I thought was incredibly touching. And it was my most cherished memory of ICMI. It was very, very special to me, and it showed that we are all in the same boat and that we care about each other. And my friend, Mr. Reagan, he later on in the conversation, he just looked over to Carl, and just said really quiet, "You're a good man." And yeah, sorry, anecdote. It was very special to me. So no matter how often the BBC says, "Carl, you are far right," or "You're a bad guy," you're a good man, and I'm very happy that I met you.
If the attempt is activism, I'm not sure if this is the most effective way of going about it, because unfortunately, what people tend to focus on is the vitriol inside of these groups, and largely a lot of the what could be considered legitimate issues inside of that get overlooked.
Unfortunately, sorry guys for you gonna hate me. I think it's a fair point. I think if we express too much resentment, too much hate, even if it's legitimate resentment and legitimate hate towards feminism and the government or certain things, it's easy to paint us as a hateful movement, similar to what feminism is. So I do not think we should shut up, and I don't think that we should play nice, because there are things that have to be called by their rightful name. And I do think that we have to say feminism is cancer, but on the other hand, it's almost always important that we show a positive approach, and that we want to solve the issues, and that we don't just want to complain. So even though this came from a feminist, let's take it to heart, and let's get something done positively, and we can still complain, but our focus should be change.
By my last day at the conference, even though I had seen legitimate issues, I could understand the concern about the overall approach.
I'm Daniel.
I guess he had to include the fact that somebody was wearing a "Make America Great Again" hat. That means we are racist, and we are homophobes, and sexists, of course, as well.
I'm from Munich in Germany.
My name is Matthew Kuntz, and I live in Seattle, Washington.
I'm mostly interested in the issues men have at the moment, because I think men are the ones under attack.
There's two major issues that come to my mind. One being male reproductive rights. The other issue that I find very troubling is genital cutting for boys in the
Again, I'm very happy that he gave some attendees a little bit of time to actually talk about real issues and what they're fighting for. And I think that both the guy from Germany and the guy from Seattle came across really, really well, and made a positive impression.
US, there's a lot of women that you should actually feel pity for. They were hurt and they need help, but the help they get, actually, they are being radicalized.
Some people.
Again, I think the fact that we care about women too, and we just have a different approach to it, I think is very positive.
Would kind of like argue that this is a place where people could potentially get radicalized.
If someone gets radicalized, it's not through the men's rights movement, but, you know, the hostility that he faces from general society at the moment.
There's always
I completely agree. I think even though there are some movements that will potentially radicalize you if you go down certain blogs and things like that, I think overall it's mainstream society that keeps attacking us, that pushes us into a direction. And I mean, even I feel it. It's so difficult for me to watch a movie now, because I'm hypersensitive to all the misandry in all these movies, and the little messages: men are bad, women are amazing, women are amazing. And after a while you start to get hypersensitive, and so I think it's mainstream society that pushes you further and further into defensive mode.
a chance for an echo chamber when you're working online and listening to people that you agree with all the time. A lot of men are going through a grieving process, and it's okay if they're in an echo chamber for a short period of time. I always encourage people to go out and talk to friends and family and also listen to other ideas so that they don't get stuck in that kind of angry mindset, that grievance mindset for too long.
I think this is just absolutely wonderfully put. One of my favorite part in the whole documentary. He expresses himself so well, and I love the fact that he is realistic and that he knows that there is pain and grief in the men's rights movement, and that people also go through phases of anger, and I think it more so maybe in the incel community and in the MGTOW community. And this is something that is, in my opinion, completely missing in the feminist movement. This appreciation of, yeah, we are broken women, we are hurt women, but we try to get better and we try to heal. I think that the feminist movement thrives of the brokenness of these women, and I don't think that feminism wants these women to heal, because it's their anger, their pain and resentment that provides the movement with energy.
So I was asked by one of the attendees of the conference if he could interview me, and it's a project where he's wearing a costume of a historical character, and he interviews the people as this character.
It's a little bit weird that that is part of the documentary, because it was nothing that was officially happening at the conference. It was a project of a YouTuber. I think a really cool project, and it feels a little bit weird. But I think from a storytelling point of view, it was really great, because it opened the story about my past.
The character was Thomas Paine, an English-American 18th century revolutionary, and the conversation quickly revolved around judging or not judging.
The point isn't to tell you, don't judge, because judging will happen.
The most extreme situation in my life where I didn't judge was my mother was shot by her second husband, and he shot himself.
I'm judging right now.
Don't.
So
I'm very happy that they included this in the documentary, because it really shows my approach, and it shows that I do not hold any hate for anybody, and I don't hold any hate for feminists either, I have to say, because in most cases people are the products of their experiences. You can always choose love over hate, and these people that are so broken, and angry, they choose hate over love. And I like the fact that he portrayed me as a person, rightfully so, as a person who always chooses love over hate. I think it portrays, at least me, and hopefully also in connection, the men's rights movement as a movement that is more focused on helping and bringing people together than division.
Would you like to share the circumstances, or?
My mother, she lived for 3 years with her second husband in South Africa, but there was a horrific moment of domestic violence where he beat her really badly, and she ran away, and she knew she had to leave him.
I'm gonna say a little bit more about this story, because I had questions in my like people asked me through emails how I can how I can forgive and how I can justify the violence that happened to my mother. And I explained the story a little bit more, because somebody said, oh, isn't that like a perfect example of toxic masculinity and male entitlement? So my mom, she was obviously married to my father, and my father is a dentist, and he's a very quiet man, and I would say not very assertive, not very strong, and my mom was looking for something else, and she found that something else in a South African weapon dealer and leader of a killer commando, working for the old government of the apartheid. So he was a killer, weapon dealer, and a racist, and he was really not a nice guy. He was also quite a bit older than my mom, and I think that lifestyle of a spy that really intrigued her in the beginning, and his extreme dominance attracted her to him. Very unhealthy, I would say. So he's definitely not your typical example of a man. He is a very extreme example of a person with personality disorder, probably a sociopath, and a lot of things happened that led to him asserting this violence. Before that, there were aspects of, I would say, strong dominance and coercive control, and I think my mom was not able to leave him emotionally. And at one point, there was a fight between me and him because he treated my mom very badly. There was no physical violence, but he treated her incredibly demeaning, called her names and stuff like that. So I defended her, I stood up to him, and that led to a fight between the two of us. And in the end, my mom sided with me, and that created a chasm, I think is the word, between him and her, and she started to emotionally free herself from his control and controlling behavior. I have to say that he had lost everything. So the old regime, the apartheid regime, disappeared. So he didn't have any connections anymore. He didn't have work anymore. He tried to write a book, but there was not a lot of interest. They tried to make money by dealing with red mercury, I think. It's pretty much to create nuclear weapons, and he lost all his he lost pretty much everything. And then my mom wanted to leave him because he was an asshole and he treated her horribly, and he then became physically abusive at least once, very severely. I don't know if there were any other cases, and it was very clear that she had to leave him, and she had organized everything. And then I think he knew that he was about to lose absolutely everything in life, and he couldn't deal with that, and he couldn't deal with this complete loss of control. He had no control over his life anymore, and the last control he had was killing my mother and himself. Is that an excuse? Absolutely not, but it's an explanation. So just to explain the circumstances a little bit more.
She had already booked her flight to come back to Germany, and my brother and me, we were talking on the phone with my mom, and during this conversation, I heard her talking to somebody in the background, and she said, "Oh, can you please leave the room? I'm talking to my boys." And then I heard how she was hit, and my brother took the telephone, and my brother heard how he heard 3 shots. And then the telephone was put on the hook. Yeah, after half an hour, we got the news that both my mom and her second husband were dead. So he shot her and then himself.
I have to tell a little story that is not connected to this one. But while we were filming this, while we were sitting on this park bench in the middle of Chicago, all of a sudden, and that was after the conference had finished, a guy drove past us on a bicycle, and I stopped him because I recognized him. He was the cameraman of another film crew that attended the conference. And they, during the whole weekend, they came across as very standoffish. I actually approached them, tried to have a nice conversation, and I was shocked how cold and standoffish they they acted towards me, and I think also to other people. It was a woman. She interviewed people, and then there was a guy with like crazy hair. Um, and I asked him what he thought about the conference, and what he said absolutely shocked me, because he said that there was um, almost no representation of women at the conference, and that female voices were oppressed. This is absolutely laughable, because a lot of the speakers were women, and the whole conference was organized by women. How much more representation can you give women on a men's rights conference? Women are such an integral part of the men's movement. It, I couldn't believe the blindness, the willful or intentional blindness, um, and the willful bias, because I'm sure he really didn't see women because there couldn't be women, I guess. It was bizarre. And then another thing that he said was that there was a panel discussion with three people, and they were talking about, uh, amongst other things, Black Lives Matter. So the panel was about, I think, people of color in the men's rights movement or in society, and so there was a question about Black Lives Matter, and there were two black people, um, and Brian from the Honey Badgers. I don't exactly know what his background is, but I think South American. I'm sorry, Brian, if I'm mistaken. And just because he had the microphone, Brian just talked about Black Lives Matter, and the two very, very vocal black speakers to the left and to the right were sitting next to him and were like nodding, and they had every chance to chip in, but I guess there was no need, because what Brian said was correct. And this documentary filmer, he said that black voices were oppressed, and in when it came to questions of Black Lives Matter, because we didn't want to hear uh, black voices. That's why there were two black speakers on that panel, I guess. And obviously, the documentary filmer was white, so I could not believe it. And at that point, I was like, there is absolutely nothing we can do as men's rights activists to convince these people that we that we are good guys, and that we are not racist and not sexist, because they have their narrative, and they they can't they can't see the truth. I'm not even sure I can blame him. Um, he's too brainwashed. It's literally like in 1984, where 2 + 2 is 5, and they cannot see that it might be 4.
If some people had this experience, they would have maybe gone the way of like hating men.
Yes, of course, I agree, and I can understand that people, due to negative experiences, become angry. But how does that help anybody? This anger should never inform your action. Your hope and love should inform your action.
Now, going back to the beginning of the documentary, where he played the suspense music and, oh, potentially evil men's rights activist, counter that with what he showed now, and this really loving and hopeful approach that I really have. And I think the way the documentary is structured puts a lot of positive and human representation of the men's rights movement at the end of the documentary, and that is what people remember of the documentary.
I just arrived here in Edinburgh at Waverley Station, and I'm gonna meet Graham. We sometimes agree on things, sometimes we disagree, and we meet for the first time.
Good to see you. See you around. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Some of their Twitter encounters have been a bit heated, so I was wondering if these two visions of masculinity were going to find any common ground.
Just now, masculinity is being defined by the some men. You know, we hear this phrase, toxic masculinity, which I detest. I don't like that phrase. But until we see more men.
I'm very happy that Graham detests the term toxic masculinity as much as I do. So there are definitely things that we agree on and that we have in common. But I do not think that that women are being defined through the few negative men that are out there. I think it's just the media that highlights these cases instead of highlighting the positive aspects of masculinity. So I think it's far less men's fault than the media's fault.
Standing up to these types of issues and taking.
That being said, obviously, if men do bad things, it's 100% their fault, and it should be called out. And I'm not saying that it should be ignored at all. I just think that when women do terrible things, and the wrong behaviors of women should be highlighted just as much. Sorry.
Like that phrase, but until we see more men standing up to these types of issues and taking responsibility on these issues, I think we're still going to find ourselves being judged. That's the ultimate goal.
That's where I address.
I find this absolutely stupid. Men are already standing up. Every time a woman gets harassed, I think men and women stand up and defend the woman, which actually does not happen when men are being attacked. Most men are good. Almost all men, I would say, are in almost all situations good. We are flawed, just like women are flawed, and there are some proper sociopaths and criminals and assholes, and you find horrible women as well. And what he is saying is pretty much, first, all men have to be good and have to be seen as good, and then society can stop shitting on us and hating us, and then maybe we can have a look at the flaws of women. And that's actually his position. He does, well, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but he does say, well, it's absolutely fine that society focuses exclusively on men, and we can look at the flaws of women at a later point in time, which, I mean, we have looked at the flaws of men for 40, 50 years now. I think it is really time to look at the flaws of both sides.
Basically disagree. When I started joining the men's rights movement, I criticized them for, why do you constantly fight against feminists and certain organizations? And then I realized that they really are part of the problem, because they perpetuate a narrative that keeps men from getting help. Could we all...
I think I could have made this point stronger, because I didn't form a sentence that would stick in your head, but I think overall the narrative that I presented was correct. And I don't think I came across as feminist bashing or close-minded. I think it was quite balanced, but because it was expressed quite balanced, it didn't stick.
What are we doing better? Of course we could be doing better, there's no doubt about that. And there's good evidence now that our boys are flaming out academically in relationships and sexually. So we need to go into it and start a narrative that fixes that, rather than a narrative that just, you know, if you want to, if that's how your focus is going to be, is about challenging the narrative that you're seeing, it's just like that, you know, I'm not going to say to you, don't do that.
I don't want to do that. That's
what
I wish they had actually continued showing what I said, because I wanted to say, I don't want to do that. I have to do that. I actually have no interest in fighting against something. I wish I didn't have to fight against feminism. I have to, because I really believe in justice, and I think that the way we are being treated is unjust, and that is in big part due to institutional feminism.
I don't like about some aspects of the men's rights activists, the men's rights movements, is it's just a constant fighting back.
I would say 90% of the people that are at this conference are in.
Unfortunately, he didn't play my answer to that statement where he said, "Oh, that we're constantly fighting back." The thing is, unfortunately, we have to. I think all men's rights activists agree with me that we would love nothing more than to actually just do our job and promote men's rights and talk to politicians about where there are problems. But as long as people shut us up intentionally, as long as people portray us as lunatics and misogynists and all of that, unfortunately, we have to take down the structures that are so dominant that other voices can't even be heard.
At this conference are in one way or the other broken.
How can we help?
I would say 90% of the people that are at this conference are in one way or the other broken.
How can we help these 90% of people at these conferences who are struggling?
It's a bit of a shame that was. I do think that most people that end up in the men's rights movement had bad experiences. Obviously, it's even more in the incel and in the MGTOW movement, I would say. Yeah, maybe. So I do think that a lot of us are broken, but we try to fix things, and that's the thing. We don't want the same things to happen to us, and Graham is now addressing that. How can these guys be helped? But the thing is, it's not about us. We don't want to help ourselves, even though we have to help ourselves, obviously, but we want to help others. We want to make sure that these horrible things don't happen to other people. And I think he doesn't really understand that in that moment.
We often say, hurt people hurt people.
Not always.
Not always. Hurt people help people. That's my viewpoint.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's exactly what the men's rights movement is all about. Hurt people, help people. We want to create something better. We are fighting for other men, even men that don't know about us. We fight for other men in the manosphere, even if they don't really respect us a lot. But in the end, if they face problems, we will fight for them. We will even fight for male feminists. We even fight for women because we care about women's rights as well, just not about feminism, obviously.
Graham and Philip seem to have a thing in common. They both believe that something transformative is going on with men, but perhaps they'd have to agree to disagree on what to do about it.
Unfortunately, it's a very abrupt end to the documentary. I wish there had been a little bit more in the end. It feels like there is a second part coming, which unfortunately there is not. But yeah, overall, I think I'm very, very happy with the documentary. I do think it's very balanced. There are some things where you can definitely tell a BBC bias or a mainstream bias, because the mainstream opinion is indoctrinated through 40 years by feminism, and I think we just have to accept that. And when we accept that, I think we have to be very, very happy with this documentary. And now, just for a couple of minutes, I want to share the responses. I would say that 80% of the responses were very, very positive in regards to men's rights. People that were clearly not men's rights activists got in contact with me and thanked me for speaking out about these issues. And some of them shared very sad and tragic and horrific stories with me about abuse, about domestic violence, about problems at work, losing their children, all of that. I mean, the issues that we all know about. I had one email from a very angry woman who told me that, yeah, pretty much that everything I say is BS, and that all Germans should be gagged for the next 100 years for the Holocaust. And then she actually said, no, not 100,000 years. And I just said, I really hope that you lose your hate, and that you don't focus so much on hate, and that you start to focus more on love. And her reaction to that was very open. And then we had a back and forth and back and forth. And after 3 emails, she agreed with what I said, and it was incredibly peaceful. And we said, let's work on a better world where men and women can love each other again. So that was really nice. On the YouTube channel, again, most comments were very, very positive. There were very few comments that challenged the man's rights perspective. And I'm incredibly surprised about that. And it makes me very hopeful. After the documentary was released, the Daily Mail wrote an article, and this article was definitely a hit piece and tried to portray me in a shady light, focusing very much on my porn history and adding a lot of photos of me posing and stuff like that. And even underneath this really, like, this hit piece of an article, even there, almost all the comments were positive about men's rights. So I don't know, maybe we are seeing a slow change of tide. I do believe that to be the case. I know some of you didn't like the documentary. Some of you didn't like the fact that I represented the men's rights movement, because I only joined the movement 2 years ago, and I absolutely appreciate that. And I do think that other people would have represented us much more eloquently. I'm sorry, I'm German. My English is not even that good. But all the people that contacted me and said, "Oh, it was a good documentary, but I would have liked to learn more about men's rights issues," I sent them links to the Red Pill documentary, which I think is just absolutely brilliant, and I sent them links to Justice for Boys and Men and other websites and organizations that inform about men's rights issues. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was incredibly long, and I assume very few people will watch the whole thing, but I thought I share my opinion about the documentary. And the most negative responses that I heard were from some people in the men's rights movement, and they said it was a typical feminist BBC hit piece. And I respect your opinion, but I think this negative view is exactly what you criticize in the BBC. They look at us and only look at the negative aspects. And I do think that the BBC here, or Alvaro, tried to make a relatively balanced documentary, and I think we should be thankful, and many were thankful, but it's always better to come across as somebody who appreciates the little fairness that we receive, because this could have been a horrible hit piece with interviews of people with much stronger opinions. Yeah. So thank you very much. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And yeah, please leave your comments. I do try to answer comments. I'm not the best at that, but I do try to answer as many comments as possible. Thank you very much.